You ready? Okay. Welcome to part 4 of Memories of Oswego County, a sharing of the history and experiences of the days gone by. The title, Memories of Oswego County, is copyrighted by the narrator, John R. Byard. This portion is taped for rebroadcast by Save Video Productions. The participants in this series volunteer their services with the hope that sponsors will be found to support the cost of future programs. Call me at 593-1306 if you wish to contribute to this series. Our purpose is to preserve this oral history for future generations to learn about their past to ensure their future. All the past is prologue. Come with me to the beautiful Mount Adngh Cemetery here in Fulton on East Broadway. This is the entrance to the cemetery off Broadway. Now we will go into the, you want to shoot? We will go into the entrance of the superintendent's house, and we'll look at how a cemetery operates. You're going to follow? We'll be right out.
You're going to go in?
Yeah. Hello, Mylan. John Byard. You've seen me before. And this is Mylan Hubbard. He's the superintendent of Mount Adngh Cemetery. And I'll let Mylan explain to you how the records of the cemetery are kept. And a lot of people do not understand these things. And he will show you just the way it's done.
Good morning. When we have a burial on our cemetery here, we register it by putting it in our lot book right here. We register them on a burial card, and we also put them in an interment book. And after that, we are now putting them in our files on our computer. As far as our deeds are recorded, recorder deeds book is right here. This is the original deed book of the cemetery, and it starts right from the beginning of the cemetery when it became an association. And we register every one of the lots in here, plus on our deed cards. And we do the same thing by registering in our computer. And as the cemetery goes on through the years, we're going to try to compute everything so it makes it easier for us to figure out where the person is buried and what lot they own and what size lot and things like this. And right now we are working on it quite heavy to get it done in a hurry, which we're saying in a hurry, but it's going to take approximately probably 2 to 3 years to get this all typed in. We'll also, after we get done with this, our deed cards and our regular burial cards are put in our files. And as far as the cemetery goes, it'll be registered at least 2 or 3 times so there's no mistakes on what, when, and how it is done. Also, we have our map of the cemetery over here, which shows all the burial lots of the cemetery. And the cemetery is approximately 42 acres. We also have approximately 8,000 more burial spots that can be sold in the cemetery. This shows our back gate and the front gate up here where the house is. And it shows some of the old layout of what the cemetery used to be. They call them the roads, avenues. There used to be an old pond area down past where the chapel is. And that was called Main Avenue. And they call it Circle Drive where the pond was. But every one of the areas where the roads are do have names. I don't have no idea what else you would like to know, but that's the extent of filing and registering all burials and deed cards.
Is there anything that you would like to add to this? How long have you been here?
I've been here 13 years.
13 years, right? And this is your residence here and your office.
Yes.
You live here. And that building over there, that was an old carriage house, right?
Yes.
All right. Whose house was this originally built for?
I really don't know.
Don't know. Okay.
I believe that it was put here originally years ago before they became a cemetery association.
I see.
Before the cemetery association, we have registered since that time all the burials that have been at that period of time when it became an association. But the cemetery originally, and the first burials were 1799.
Yes, we have the history here. We'll pick that up, and we want to see the, you keep your equipment back there in the carriage house, is that right?
Yes.
Like the lawnmowers and like that. What kind of help do you have here to help you with this?
We have just one person working full-time besides myself.
And this is one of the problems of the cemetery
Yes,
association, right? Then right now we'll move along because you are involved with spring burials. I understand that?
Yes.
Could you just explain for a minute about a spring burial? A lot of people don't realize what that is.
Well, in the wintertime here, it's not feasible for to go out there and bury because we can't get out there because of the snow. That we put them in our winter vault, which is back of the house on the 7th Street side. And we keep the bodies in there until it's time for the spring where we can have burials. Or we can get out in the cemetery to do this.
We're going to talk about Dr. Waters, and you and I talked about that some time ago, and I'm going to tell the whole story of that with your permission. And George has done a wonderful job, and I'm talking about George Weiss, who was on the committee. Has done a wonderful job in locating Lubian. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, we'll see you again. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.
George's going to do a tour.
Ah, who are we talking with?
No Tom Canteen?
Just talk with us. Glad you came. Well, I'll tell you, you made a big gap in there because we just got a gap, but that's all right. Would you like to do your little bit right now, as long as we're here? Want to stand over by us so we can see the other side of that? Come on, Marianne. Come on, Tom. You're going to explain about the purpose of the Preservation Committee, right? And you are the president. All right. Okay, we're following right here. Just stand right there. That's fine. You get the back of the cemetery. And Tom, George, come on over here, and we'll introduce you later. George, come over here, please. And Don Ross, I'll let you introduce here, Mr. President.
You got to get closer. You've got to stay so we get some pickup on your mic.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Here we are.
My name
Okay.
is Don Ross, and I'm president of the Mount Adngh Preservation Foundation. And our task is not to run the cemetery, but rather to raise money to preserve it. And that's what we hope to do. Now, I'd like to introduce, before I continue, my wife, Mary Ellen, Tom Canteen, and George Wise. Now, what we're doing is we're approaching the community, basically everybody, and asking them to contribute $10 to become a friend of Mount Adngh. Now, we're going to send out letters, and we've got a mailing list of over 500 of people that we think might be interested, but we're not sure. We won't know until we get the returns and find out how many people are willing to contribute $10 to become a friend. Now, we're hoping we will have hundreds of people that will contribute. But even if we do, this won't be enough money to do all the things that need to be done to preserve Mount Adngh and to keep it a beautiful park that you're going to see later in this film. What a nice place it really is.
Don, excuse me.
Yes, go ahead.
If people that want to send money in, where should they send that?
Okay, the address is 8 Riverview Drive. That's in Fulton. Zip code, of course, is 13069. Now, again, that address is 8 Riverview Drive. And that's the attention of the Mount Adngh Preservation Foundation. So we need all your help, and we're hoping that we will get substantial support from the community so that we can then go out to businesses and industries and tell them that the community is behind this, and then they will be willing to give their support.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, folks. And we'll see Tom and George later and Mary Ellen, and we'll introduce the things that they're going to do. If you'll just hold on. I'm just going to walk down here with the camera and give a brief history of it. And I want to mention here that Mary Ellen is the city historian of the city of Fulton. We'll take a little walk. At the entrance here, as you can see, the supports the edge, there was an elliptical wrought iron sign between the pillars that identified the cemetery. It fell into disrepair some time ago, and it was never replaced. It would just cost too much. It was just one of the many things that have plagued the cemetery in the last few years that has not had the money to keep it up properly. Now, we could walk down here and just take a look at the cemetery, if you would, please. Fultonians and area residents have passed by it many times with no more than a parting glance. It is part of the local landscape, one of the dozen or more cemeteries that are interspersed in and around Fulton. You've seen one, you've seen them all. Rows and rows of marble stones, with a statue now and then to break up the monotony. However, Mount Adngh is a bit different from the rest. Its 42 acres runs east along Broadway to 12th Street and along the northern boundary of St. Mary's, which is to my south. What sets it apart from the other cemeteries, though, is a magnificent stand of oak trees, and you can see a few of them right here. It is the largest group of oaks in central New York. There are 465 trees, 264 of which are red and white oak. They tolerate a small mixture of sweet gum trees. A Japanese ginkgo tree remains the lone import. The rest are native. Visitors to the cemetery remark how cool it is underneath the leafy umbrella of the huge oak branches on the hottest day of the summer. The name of the cemetery is also unusual. The word Adngh is taken from Syriac, the language of Syria, spoken from the 3rd to the 13th century. It means rest or repose. Mount Adngh means, therefore, the Mount of Rest. And I think we're going to walk back and we'll take a little tour through the cemetery. Okay. The Mount Adngh Cemetery Association was formed June 2nd, 1851. And the original plot of the 35 acres, originally pine, was purchased. In 1853, the land was mapped by Peter Skank, who also had surveyed the boundaries of the village of Fulton some time before. The burial of D.R. Case, September 23rd of that year, was the first interral in the new cemetery. In 1875, Rochester and 7th Streets were opened through the old cemetery, and the remains that were there were reinterred in Mount Adngh. Look at those cars go by. The remains of people buried in some of the old cemeteries in other parts of Fulton were also reinterred here in Mount Adngh. As the needs for lots increased, walks and drives were developed and the pines were thinned out, favoring the oaks. By the turn of the century, a receiving vault, an ornamental stone and iron gateway and fencing had been completed. The new century saw this resting ground emerge as the most beautiful in the Oswego Valley. Yes, I'd like to introduce George Weiss of Fulton. He is the director of the committee, the Preservation Committee. George, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've done here?
Well, I'm also a day-to-day volunteer at the cemetery and cleaning up. As far as the cemetery, I'm quite interested in, the older graves and the stones and the condition of the cemetery. And I do all I can to beautify it in my own particular way and manner.
I'd like to tell a joke, if I might. George, we've had dealings before. I'm the historian of the town of Granby. And last year we did a little thing with the 4th grades on Arbor Day. And George was looking for some of his relatives in the town of Granby. So he came over and I said, well, why don't you wait till after the ceremony and we'll go look for this. So he came in and he remarked, he said, well, I came over to see John's tree so I could get my roots. Well, let us go take a walk down here and see a few of the points of interest. Okay, and at Mount Adngh. George?
The vault is the present-day vault that replaced the older one, which is down in a valley and not able to have very good access in the winter, another 4 months. And here they come in off in 7th Street and it's for the storage of bodies that are awaiting burial.
Excuse me, George. In other words, what you're saying is the entrance is over on 7th Street.
The
Entrance to the vault. All right, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Mylan explained to us about why the bodies were stored there, and so I think probably that we got a good picture of that right now, so maybe we'll continue our tour.
okay.
Okay, we go right down this way. Over to my right rear here is a storage place where they keep the equipment, which Mylan mentioned before, and it is particularly noticeable because of its architectural arrangement. Notice the cupola at the top. At one time it was a carriage house for the people that lived in the house where the superintendent lives right now, and mostly it is used for storage. Okay. George, you mentioned some time ago the background of this area right in here, some of these older burials. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, from some of the stones that I've seen and some that I've uncovered, and we will soon be over to where Fulton's first recorded death and burial is. This was actually a cemetery before it became Mount Adngh Cemetery. And the stories that I've had over, the past few years is that it was bought for the express use of being a cemetery and called Mount Adngh. But I believe that before that time, it was used for a cemetery, possibly a family cemetery, possibly the John Waterhouse family cemetery. And we're off in this area here is where matter of fact, the first and second recorded deaths in the Fulton area are buried. And these stones, I believe at one time were standing, and they have deteriorated and fell over, and they have just let them lay here, and they've gravity has taken care of them, and they've gone into the ground. Recently I have cleaned them off. Now we're talking about John Waterhouse here, who died August 1st, 1799, and is buried here, and his wife, Sarah.
Maybe you'd want to take a look from this other side so we could read some of the inscriptions on there.
This is a
Excuse me just a minute.
Sure.
There, you read that a little better now. You want to tell about that, George?
Well, this is the first recorded death in the Fulton area of August 1st, 1799, and the burial was here at that time. Now, this man's son and daughter lay over here behind him. Here's the second recorded death in 1800 of the man's son at 20 years of age. His name was Nathaniel Waterhouse. And then he had a daughter named Harriet, who died later on in 1820, and she was buried here.
Now, George, there are some unusual monuments in here with epitaphs on. I think we ought to walk over and see the one over here on Fred Block. Is that all right?
That would be a very good idea.
George, I'll read that. I have it right here. This is the, did you hear all right? This is the marker of Fred Block, 1862-1942. And he was, left his last thoughts here. He said, "I am the forgotten man. I raised a daughter and a son. They beat me out of my home. Here to this city I came and made myself an independent home." That was his last words, and here they are. We have other markers here which express the sentiments of the interred, and we'll visit a couple of those on the way. Now, George, would you show us where the next would be that terrific one of the Case Chapel up on top of it?
Yes, it'll be right up through this area here.
It's okay. We'll walk over there. George, this is a very unique monument up here. I don't believe I ever saw one like that. Could you tell us a little about that?
Well, I know very little about it, but this is the Case family plot here. And the chapel itself, it looked like it was conceived and put here before the Case Memorial Chapel was built, erected, and passed on to the cemetery here. This is the George M. Case plot in this area. There's quite a number of cases, incidentally, in this particular area.
And later on, we'll have Tom Canteen, who was a descendant of the Cases. He will talk about the Case family when we get down around the chapel and the mausoleum, one of the mausoleums. And I think
one of the Case family, Russell Case, was the first recorded burial in Mount Adngh Cemetery as such. And we can go over to that stone and plot over here.
all right. Okay. We're off, right? Good. Look at this right here. It's one of the old bronze markers. Most of them disappeared. I won't mention that. Somebody will disappear tomorrow, right?
This is true. Now, you can, if you want me to...
Yeah, okay. Here we go. Yes, George. You wanted to talk about the first burial?
In this area, we can, while we're going through here, you can show the trees, which add to the beauty of the cemetery itself. There is 265 red oak trees in this cemetery.
I mentioned that over there.
And in this area, this is what needs, pruning and cleaned up. That's part of what. Now, sometimes the limbs falling and weather itself will lead to headstones cracking and breaking off in this area here, along with weather and deterioration. And this is part of what needs to be taken care of here.
Now, you wanted to show us the first...
Yes.
Yeah. All right, George, can you tell us about this stone
Well,
here?
this gentleman here is D. Russell Case, died in 1853. He is the first recorded burial in Mount Adngh Cemetery after it became Mount Adngh, along with his spouse is there.
All right. Now, we'll move down here, and I would like to tell the story of Dr. Waters. All right? Okay, we're just going to walk. You tell me when to stop. Then after that, I'm going to get Tom Canteen. We're going to walk down there, and he's going to talk about the cases. Okay? Okay. Well, here at the plot here of Dr. Waters. Dr. Waters has a fantastic story. Down through the centuries, some people have had a fear of being buried alive. Dr. Waters is one of those. Some of the measures they took to ensure against this ever happening makes interesting reading. Some end up in Ripley's Believe It or Not. One of the unusual stories about the man who had a foam put in his casket so they could summon aid in case he came alive while entombed. Another man had a periscope put in his so that someone could look down on him to ascertain if he had awakened. Still another had a bell installed on his gravestone with a rope in the casket so he could pull it in case he came alive. The list goes on and on. Fulton had one of these that I just talked about in 1859. Dr. Columbus Waters, a local physician who lived on Oneida Street, passed away that year. The terms of his will included specific instructions as to the disposition of his body. They were not the usual burial requests. Evidently, during medical school, the doctor had been intrigued with the subject of a catatonic trance. This type of trance was brought on in a few isolated cases by severe sickness. It was a condition where the subject gives off all signs that he, it seemed to be limited to males, has passed away. In the studied cases, there was no apparent heartbeat and no pulse. In some cases, the person awoke in the undertaker's parlor. In others, they were not so fortunate. Dr. Waters made up his mind when he was living that this would never happen to him after he died. He purchased a large plot southeast of the entrance of Mount Adngh Cemetery. And this is the plot, George, right here?
Yes,
This is the plot. Now, what it said was that he had a mausoleum here. But as you can see, we could not find a mausoleum. Above ground mausoleum. Inside the mausoleum was a simple bier on which his coffin was to be laid. Meanwhile, he had a special coffin made of cast iron which was designed to fit the shape of his body. The coffin had a lid which could simply be lifted off in case the doctor awoke. After his death, the coffin was placed on the bier as he requested, and a box of matches and the candle were placed on a table alongside. The key to the outside door to the vault was there also, so that the doctor could find his way out if he came to. Some years later, a seance was held, inasmuch as the doctor never awoke. A medium who lived in Fulton at the time contacted the spirit of Dr. Waters during the seance. The doctor had only this to say, "I am uncomfortable because the coffin pinches my feet." I became so curious about the Dr. Waters story that several years ago I visited Milan, who is the superintendent of the cemetery, and he checked the record book. Dr. Waters' name was there all right, but when we looked for his mausoleum, as you see, it was nowhere to be found. Further checking showed that the Waters plot had been sold by his estate a few years after his death, and many burials under another name had been made in the plot since. As you see, many burials here. The mausoleum and the body just seem to have evaporated. Now, George Wise, who you just listened to, told me he had solved the mystery. And so later on, we will let George tell how he solved the mystery. And I think we should continue our walk. Now, we'll go down and talk with Tom Canteen, who is a descendant of the Case family.
Who, because of a...
No, to get into that, don't get into that road.
Okay.
Are you shooting? Okay, we gotta hold that to later.
Is a carriage path.
Okay.
That ran right
All right.
through here at one time.
We'll cover that later. Okay. All right. We couldn't run a rehearsal on this because it wear me out from walking. Now we're going back here and get Tom Canteen, and he'll go down. We'll go down to the case. That's all right.
Of the case.
All right. You tell me when you're ready. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. This is Tom Canteen on my right, and he is a descendant of the Case family. They're a well-known family in the history of Fulton. Tom?
Hi. Well, I don't know where we're going with
All right, we'll go. What do you want to walk down here, and you tell us about it? All right, okay.
What do you want me to do? Tell you about the family and the...
Tell me what you would like to tell about the Case family.
Oh, okay.
Explain the Case chapel. Explain the mausoleum down here where the Case people were buried.
All right. Well, the Case family arrived in the Fulton area in the early 1800s. Jonathan Case came from Hoosick, New York, and from Jonathan they had several sons, one of which was Samuel, which is buried in a plot. He's buried with his family in a plot up here.
We just covered that up there. Yeah. So we were just going to stay down there. It was pretty extensive, so
yes,
we thought we would cut that off.
But Jonathan had a daughter, Cora, who was my grandmother's mother, and so that's the line of descendants from that point. They were very prominent people in the area. They owned a lot of property in the area. They were contractors and merchants. They had a lot to do with one of the local banks in Fulton, which was the Citizens National Bank, which was located under the Hotel Lewis in downtown Fulton on the corner of Cayuga Street and First. As I said, they were primarily contractors and merchants, and also politicians. Seems that each one of the family members at one time or another were presidents of both Oswego Falls and Fulton. And they were also in the New York State Assembly. Several members of the family were assembly members. And then, of course, the Lewis line, he was the mayor of Fulton and also in the Assembly in New York State.
Now, we're coming to the Case Chapel. Is there anything that George is up to date on the condition of that? Is there anything that you'd like to explain about that, how it was built and things like that?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how it was built. It
Well,
was,
we can get
given
that.
By,
Yeah,
given
by the Case.
Eva Case.
And this mausoleum down here was the Case family mausoleum?
I believe so, yeah.
All right, shall we go take a look at that? The Case Chapel is an architectural beauty,
Oh, absolutely.
but over the years it has slowly deteriorated, and due to lack of money, and this is one thing that they would do, is to fix that.
Mm-hmm.
It has been vandalized, the mortar's fallen out of the cracks, and it's in very serious condition.
What's the inside like?
Well, it's not too good. It has a mosaic floor on it. We were going to look at that, but George didn't think that would actually be necessary because it has been filled in here. You see, here's where the casket came in here for the services. They entered here, and if you want to bring that over here, we can. And because of the caskets were in here, and then they were held up in the but you see, they've had to fill that in because of vandalism.
Right.
Look at that beautiful.
It is. It's still
beautiful. Yeah, it can be repaired, but that's one of the things that they want to do. Now, where is the Case mausoleum here? This was the old. Mausoleum where they stored the bodies before the one that we just looked at up there, the cement block building. This was the old one.
I don't know if there was a
Is there Case? We should have George down here. All right, this is the Pratt family mausoleum, and Pratts were merchants in town here, and they were well known. The present Fulton Historical Society was the John Pratt house originally, and if you'll come up a little closer, you can read some of the inscriptions on there. Your light is off. See, there is a complete. The door has been blocked because of vandalism. Nothing is safe today, it doesn't seem like. Maybe we'll take a little walk up here and we'll look at another one of these. Only the wealthy people could afford something like this. Here's one of the... George, glad you came over. You're just in time.
Yes,
All right.
try and catch Pratt.
Well, we already shot that.
Grandfather's brother was superintendent of
Come on over here. Come on over here.
Alexander Wise was superintendent of the boat works in the late 1870s, early 1800s for Mr. Pratt.
All right. So, how about this one here? There's a beauty right there. This is what, George? This one here. Gage.
This is the Gage.
Gage has mills, right?
Yes, yes. I don't know that much about these.
Well, the Gage people had the mill where right next to would be west of the Valley News on Oneida Street, and where the canal cut back there, the oldest Oswego Canal, and that was burned. But it was one of the main mills around here. They were one of the first mills to get what they call a roller mill. They quit using stone grinding and went to a metal grinding process. But the flour mills here in Fulton all went out due to the midge, the wheat midge. All the grain to produce flour here in Fulton came from local farmers. And a midge is a little, some sort of a insect that that makes a worm, and it gets in the wheat and eats it. And because they had no control like pesticides today, the wheat mills ran the flour mills all out of business. And what the midge didn't ruin, the fires got. They're highly, highly combustible, because when the wheat was ground, it made a very fine, well, it's like a combustible volatile thing in the air. And just one little spark would ignite the whole thing. So let us move over here, George, and see the Davises. Do you know anything about the Davis family? Anything you would want to add?
Are we off now?
We're on. Are we on?
You're on. Or
They're on. We're on.
I didn't see the light, that's why I was...
All right. Your light's off, Terry. All right.
Don't need it out here.
Okay. It's nothing like telling the photographer how to take pictures, right? Yeah.
You do the number on the chapel and all that?
No, we're going back over that. We're doing around it, and I just
Okay.
did, and you
All
can
right.
bring us up
Okay.
to date on that. Let's go back to the chapel, or unless you want to say something on this one here.
No.
All right, let's go back to the chapel. And George is right up to date on this.
I don't know about being up to date, but...
Well, I explained about where the bodies came in here, and Tom asked about the inside, and I told him it had a parquet floor. It was in pretty bad shape. We explained about the vandalism, the beautiful stained glass windows, and how the mortar has fallen out of the cracks. And why don't you pick it up from there, George?
Well, for the most part, you can see when he swings the camera by of what has happened to the governor marble, as they call it, and the cracks and the opening up.
Excuse me right there, before I forget it. Would you explain why they use governor marble there, and explain where it comes from?
Well, the governor marble came from governor.
Well, all right. A lot of people don't even know where governor is.
For the most part, had a sparkle and a shine to it, which this has. It was my impression when I first saw this, just a cut granite type of block that they use. But since that time, I've been trying to inform myself as to what they did use, and it seems to me that it qualifies because there is a sparkle and a glint to the stone itself. And what is happening, you can see from a close-up here, it is starting to split and widen and deteriorate. And it's a shame. It was a very, very integral part of, the beauty of this area.
Well, George, I think we ought to go back and get Mary Ellen now, the city historian, and have her tell us about some of the military burials here, and we'll let her take it from there.
Storing it. What would they do? Take each one of those bricks apart?
Morning, John.
Fanny, you're here. Okay, listen. Mary Ellen Ross, city historian, going to tell about this more here.
Yes. In memory of the Civil War, by the L of the GAR, and that means ladies of the GAR. And I did a little research, John, because I wasn't quite sure what the ladies of the GAR are. Well, I found out that they were sort of like the auxiliary of the Shank section of the GAR, and as you know, they did the monument over in the park.
Right. You might mention that the GAR was the Grand Army of the Republic. A lot of people are not up on this, but I just had to interject that.
That's a good idea.
Okay.
You know what I mean? By the way, all of their remaining papers, their gavel, their voting box, they're down there in the Pratt House. They were donated to the Historical Society.
Oh, that's interesting.
And did a little research and found out that Madeline Howell used to be the director of the
Yes.
Chamber of Commerce, donated them.
Oh.
So I called up Madeline, and she said that they no longer meet, but that she is a member of the state organization. And her mother was one of the past presidents of the ladies of the GAR, and actually I think that their name was the Columbus or the Columbian chapter. Looked in the cemetery records, and they purchased this property in 1925. Guess how much they paid for it? Now, there's 6 or 7 graves there.
I have no idea.
$50.
Oh, my goodness.
$50.
Huh.
Now, for another little, I don't know, you've been talking about gravestones and all the famous people buried here. There's something else I'd like to point out.
All right.
It's the oak trees.
All right.
And the oak trees are probably the oldest living thing we have in Fulton. They were here when the cemetery was laid out, which was like 1852. My husband told me there was a pine forest, and they cut down an awful lot of good timber with the pine, and left the oak trees, and they're still here. So when you get right down to it, there's not much. How old would that be? Like 100?
Oh, pretty old.
Pretty
Pretty
old.
old, right?
Because they were here before, so
Yes.
there were some of the oldest
And of
that
course,
are.
where the oak trees go to squirrels. I haven't seen one yet. They must have seen us coming and all hid.
Well, we're pretty squirrely.
All right. What about the internals here of the different wars? Are you, we're talking about right here the Civil War.
Yeah, well, George just showed us, and you've got to miss it, somebody will have to come.
All right.
Over near the office, the Civil War veterans have a
Oh,
large
right.
plot.
Okay.
But I know that there's something that the DAR has put up, and
Okay.
maybe you'll call Fanny Knapp, and she'll tell you
Okay.
about those.
All right. Okay. So we'll go over and talk with Fanny. Fanny? This is Fanny Knapp, and you're
Good
a
morning.
resident here. Lives out on the Lakeshore Road. Got a beautiful view of Lake Neanawanda. How do you spell Lake Neanawanda? I won't. Go ahead.
N-E-A-H-P-A-H-W-A-N-T-A.
A lot of people don't know how to spell it, but
Got
if
2
you
H's in it, which
if
they
you-
leave out a half the sign.
if you go
Either one or the other.
if you go over by her house over there, she got right on the barn. It's got Neanawanda spelled right out, and that's the most acceptable spelling. When I first came here, I went down to the city engineer's office and asked him how he had Neanawanda spelled. And then I went to the county, and they all spelled it different, so I don't think anybody really knows. But I think your spelling is the best. Yeah.
Map I
You
could
did?
find at
Well,
the
then,
time. when we
I've always
put it on
used
the
that
map.
spelling, right.
That's-
Now, would you show us what you were going to do here with the DAR?
Our DAR was founded in 1904. And in 1905, they decided to start sort of monument for the Revolutionary soldiers.
All right, we're going to walk over there. And she belongs to a chapter here that we have another problem with its pronunciation. And
That's K.N.Ciona chapter.
that's right on the marker there.
It's an Indian name, too. And we try to keep a flag flying by the monument, at least from Memorial Day to September. The founders of the organization, it started with a Mrs. John Vincent in 1904, and there were 16 founding members. In May of 1905, they decided to work toward this monument. And they decided they would pay they would donate $25 a year toward the cost of the monument. In 1908, the trustees of the cemetery gave them this lot, and at that time, this lot was valued at $105. Of course, money meant a lot more at that time than it does now. And in 1913, the members, with the help of outside donations too, raised $500 and ordered this monument from a Mr. Crawford in Buffalo, New York. And then on Memorial Day in 1913, it was unveiled here at the cemetery. Now I can remember, this was before my time, but still, when I was a child, they still had an annual Memorial Day parade in Fulton. And it was a big thing, including floats and everything. So the day they had this unveiled, they had the Boy Scouts and the veterans and probably the whatever other civic organizations they had were here. So we're quite proud of the monument. And on the far side, it has 39 names.
Joey,
that
would you like to
I
go over and
imagine they were
take a
probably
look
from
at
the
that? Yeah.
Oswego County or...
Sure, you could tell us about that. We look at the other side. Oh, would you want to get with this angle all right here?
There's 39 names engraved on the monument, but only 4 are actually buried here in Mount Adngh. The 4 are Aaron Fish, James Hollins, Barnett Mooney, and Joseph Perigo. And I was looking on here this morning, and I found their names. Aaron Fish and James Hollins and Major Barrett Mooney.
Barnett Mooney.
No?
No, Major?
Yeah, Barnett.
Yeah,
That's
Barnett,
right.
yeah.
Barnett.
He's from
Barnett.
the town of Granby.
He came from New Jersey.
Yeah.
And the last one is Pfeiffer Joseph Perigo. He originally came from Rhode Island.
Yes.
And those men are apparently still here, from the cemetery someplace.
Well, does that cover that pretty well?
That's
All right,
all
right.
That's all I have
Well,
on the
what a-
monument. And we
Thank you so much,
try to keep
Penny,
it up every
for
year.
coming over. And now we'll continue our tour of the cemetery. Over here, this is Albert Lindley Lee, your Brigadier General, United States. Excuse me, just a minute. Here, you want to tell the story of Dr. Lee here? You want to tell the story of Dr. Lee? No? And, we have Lee Memorial Hospital here in the city of Fulton. And through the gift of the family of Dr. Lee, or Albert Lindley Lee, General Lee, we have the Lee Memorial Hospital. There's quite a history to it. He was a general in the Civil War. So I'll leave that like it is. We have many more places to go here. I wasn't planning on telling about Dr. Lee, really. It's probably the most famous burial we got here in this cemetery. A fella came here from Mississippi, and he said, well, I heard that you had General Lee over here. And I said, well, I guess he's over here. Let's go take a look. Did came all the way in from Mississippi. They come from all over to visit in here, and it's a shame that that the finances have gotten down where they have. It's just a real treasure, a historical treasure. Well, let us continue our little walk. Are we ready to go? Are we ready to go? All right.
Look here. Let's see what his wife wrote to him.
Yeah,
All right.
on the back of that.
Would you like to look at this?
Yeah.
Here, Mary Ellen's found a little phrase down there. You want to read that off there, Fanny, or what? All right.
Read it, Fanny.
Warm
Read it.
summer sunshine kindly here. Warm summer winds blow softly here. Green sod above, lie light. Good night, dear heart. Good night, good night. Good night.
What a wonderful
Must
epitaph.
be
Yes.
what his wife wrote to him.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we must continue. Time is running. Yeah, I'm going to write back with you. I hope. Get out of this wind, my goodness.
Well, I guess.
My gosh, George, let's get out of this wind. Let's get the men out of the hot sun here. All right. How much time we got now, Terry?
Okay.
Okay. George?
Well, in all particular areas and phases of the cemetery, we have the leaves and limbs are quite a maintenance item. They probably represent 30–40% of the maintenance of the cemetery itself. And yet, without the trees that are here, we would not have the beautiful cemetery that we have.
All right. Now we'll go over and you'll finish. Is that about it?
Yeah.
All right. Now we'd like over and find out what happened. We'll find out what happened to Dr. Waters. Okay, if you would lead us over there, George.
Sure.
All right. All right, we talked about the lost mausoleum, the missing mausoleum of Dr. Waters. And thanks to George, we found where it went. And George has been real active here, and he found the following in the microfilms of the Fulton Times for November 9th, 1881, and explains where the monument went. And I quote, "The vault in Mount Adna that has contained the remains of Dr. Columbus Waters for years is to be removed to another part of the cemetery in order to allow the road to be straightened. The remains are in a remarkable state of preservation and were easily recognizable by old acquaintances." And George is still working on finding the monument, but he's almost sure it's here. And George, if you would tell us about what you think here. And we'll just walk over here. This is where Dr. Waters ended up. Would you tell us about that?
Yes. As far as I can ascertain, underneath here there's a probably brick underground vault containing the body of Columbus Waters, Dr. Waters. And the original burial card of this lady that's laying next to him states that she was put in Dr. Waters' vault. And that seems good enough for me.
Sounds good enough for me. I want to thank you for all the work that you've done and research. And thank you again for leading us through this remarkable cemetery. And now we'll go over and talk, if we can find Cliff Foster, who is the head of the organization that actually has charge of the cemetery. So I think, Terry, if you'll follow us over there, well, folks, we were lucky to have weather that we could do this, and I'm sure it's have a good effect on people now that they understand why they need money for this place. And I want to thank you, Mary Ellen, the historian, for coming over with your husband, Don, who's president of the organization, and George Weiss, who I'd be lost without. I'm all worn out, George. You're younger than I am anyhow, but I think it's time to go. And thank you. Au revoir.
And thank you.
And very good, very good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Good. That was good. We should have... Oh, all right. Okay. All right. Here we are. Okay.
My name is Don Ross, and I'm president of the Mount Adna Preservation Foundation. And our task is not to run the cemetery, but rather to raise money to preserve it. And that's what we hope to do. Now, I'd like to introduce, before I continue, my wife, Mary Ellen, Tom Cantine, and George Wise. Now, what we're doing is we're approaching the community, basically everybody, and asking them to contribute $10 to become a friend of Mount Adna. Now, we're going to send out letters, and we've got a mailing list of over 500 of people that we think might be interested, but we're not sure. We won't know until we get the returns and find out how many people are willing to contribute $10 to become a friend. Now, we're hoping we will have hundreds of people that will contribute. But even if we do, this won't be enough money to do all the things that need to be done to preserve Mount Adna, to keep it a beautiful park that you're going to see later in this film what a nice place it really is.
Don, excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
If people that want to send money in, where should they send that?
Okay, the address is 8 Riverview Drive. That's in Fulton. Zip code, of course, is 13069. Again, that address is 8 Riverview Drive. And that's the attention of the Mount Adna Preservation Foundation. So we need all your help, and we're hoping that we will get a substantial support from the community so that we can then go out to businesses and industries and tell them that the community is behind this, and then they will be willing to give their support.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, folks. And we'll see Tom and George later, and Mary Ellen, and we'll introduce